Considering the current state of the world, it's hard to be anything but pessimistic. Environmental destruction, plummeting living standards, the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, and even the threat of nuclear war are all enough to give even the most doggedly optimistic minds pause for thought. But Dr. Stone is different. Somehow, despite it all, it remains proudly positive, confident in its belief that science will win. There are many reasons why I love Riichiro Inagaki and Boichi's Weekly Shonen Jump series, but its positive outlook definitely is a big one. Senku's unwavering faith in the potential of humanity is downright inspiring considering the world he came from, while also leading to some scenes that are almost transcendental in nature. Putting aside the fact that Dr. Stone was what originally got me into reading manga weekly and led to some of my first gigs as a writer, the series has always occupied a special place in my heart because of this positive attitude. What's more, the conflicting ideologies of the characters it follows on both sides give the series a philosophical dimension that I can't help but enjoy. It's interesting to note that most of the villains move against Senku because they have a different vision of how the world should be, making it a lot more cerebral than many other Weekly Shonen Jump series. In many ways, Dr. Stone is a manga about philosophy, although I suppose anything can be if you look at it hard enough. To celebrate the series' recent conclusion, I'd like to take a look at the various philosophies present in Dr. Stone, how they come into conflict with one another, as well as why certain parts of the series feel a little lacking without them. Unfortunately, this will require straying into some spoiler territory, including some stuff that is yet to be adapted in the anime, so consider yourself warned. I'll also drop some additional warnings in the title cards as they come. Nothing really defines the philosophical approach of Dr. Stone quite like the clash between Senku and Tsukasa. Right at the beginning of the series, it sets the tone for nearly everything to come, while also providing so much narrative energy to the early arcs. Even if I do find later conflicts to be a little more compelling, there's no denying its importance. What initially appears to divide Senku and Tsukasa is the issue of whether or not to revive all of humanity following the petrification. For Senku, this is a no-brainer, while Tsukasa wants to use this opportunity to create a new world and purify it of the evils that prevailed in the old. More specifically, he wants to create a society where the haves no longer exploit the have-nots by only reviving the pure-hearted youth. Beneath the surface, however, lies a fundamental difference in opinion towards progress and the development of human society. It's Senku's belief that science and technology can actually help humanity to overcome the problems that plagued pre-petrification society if given enough time, whereas Tsukasa sees technology as one of the main problems. He cautions Senku against developing such things as firearms, arguing that they would bring us back to darker times and allow the powerful to dominate the weak once again, especially if said technology were to be placed back in the hands of the newly revived oppressors. Later on, Tsukasa makes his intentions very clear by only reviving the young and gifted to be part of his ideal society in the form of the Empire of Might. There are elements of social Darwinism or survival of the fittest in this, but I would say that Tsukasa's philosophy mirrors more closely that of anarcho-primitivism. Arguably originating in the 18th century with romantic conception of the noble savage, uncorrupted by modern society, this philosophy was then later revived in a different form in the 20th century in response to the various problems caused by the development of industrial capitalism, namely massive levels of inequality and environmental destruction. As to why Tsukasa is more of an anarcho-primitivist than a social Darwinist, I would say that the first and most important reason is that he sees inequality as a problem. Someone like Herbert Spencer would probably argue that inequality was essential for the development of human society, while it's also up for debate just how much the Empire of Might's ideology is that of Tsukasa's, after his second in command, Hyuga, revealed his own beliefs towards the end of the Stone Wars arc. In any case, Tsukasa definitely uses very similar arguments to such anarcho-primitivist thinkers as Daniel Quinn, who advocated in his book My Ishmael for a new tribal revolution that would get rid of social stratification and also instill a more harmonious relationship with nature by reverting society back to more traditional tribal structures. That being said, Tsukasa's ideology isn't entirely analogous to this. Not only have we already discussed the possible influence of his second in command, his quest to only revive the pure-hearted youth and leave behind the so-called rotten adults seems to stem more from childhood trauma than any kind of holistic philosophy or worldview. I say this because right at the beginning of the series, Tsukasa tells Senku a story about a boy who was collecting seashells on a beach for his sister. All he wanted to do was fulfill her dream of becoming a mermaid, but he was assaulted by an older man for trespassing on his private property. As if it wasn't already enough from the character design, this boy is more or less confirmed to be Tsukasa later on when we find out that he has a sister called Mirai who is in a coma. So this explains why he holds so much hatred and animosity towards the rich and powerful older generation. I'm also sorry if the phrases pure-hearted youth and rotten adults are giving you major cringe, but I think that this is sort of the point. Tsukasa's ideology is ultimately a childish one, born out of understandable yet extreme circumstances. One particularly powerful demonstration of what science can do when Senku revives Mirai at the end of the Stone Wars arc is therefore more than enough to break the burden of his past and change his point of view. To be honest, I don't think that Tsukasa ever really believed that humanity's future lay in turning back the clock, especially when he agonised over breaking statues so much that he remembered the location of each and every one of them. No, his role as the strongest primate high schooler was always meant to be at Senku's side, ensuring that things could be better by looking forward to the future rather than back to the prehistoric past. Following on from this, it's worth noting that Senku isn't exactly ignorant of society's problems pre-petrification. At no point does he make any attempt to refute Tsukasa's claims that the haves exploit the have-nots, but the key thing here is that his belief in the power of science and technology gives him confidence that such problems can be solved in the future. There is another antagonist who actually shares this point of view, but envisions going about it in an entirely different way: Dr. Xeno. During the New Corn City arc, we are introduced to Xeno as a sort of foil for Senku, being another scientist from the pre-petrification world with a very loyal childhood friend. Unlike Tsukasa, he believes in the power of technology and the possibility of progress, but only if society is run by the enlightened. His experience as a professional NASA scientist have taught him that idiots who believe in such worthless concepts as ethics, morals and politics constantly stand in the way of true development, hence why the Stone World should be run as a technocratic dictatorship with himself and potentially Senku at the top. In many ways, he's actually Tsukasa's worst nightmare, as he wants to use weapons of war as a method of social control, having already developed sophisticated firearm technology in the time since his awakening. The belief in technocracy, meaning a society run by those with expertise or special knowledge, is almost as old as civilization itself. The ancient Greek philosopher Plato actually argued in Republic that until philosophers or kings, or the kings and princes of this world have the spirit and power of philosophy, cities will never rest from their evils. In other words, societies can only be governed effectively by those with sufficient knowledge or expertise, like a philosopher, but this necessarily excludes large portions of the population. Consequently, technocracy tends to go against the ideals of democracy, and also tends to come hand in hand with a belief in dictatorship. Following the failure of a plot against his life in 1804, Napoleon Bonaparte is said to have remarked that, "They seek to destroy the revolution by attacking my person. I will defend it, for I am the revolution. So despite taking power in a coup and ruling France as a dictator from 1799, he still very much regarded himself as a revolutionary and a believer in its liberal, rational ideals. Now that may sound strange given how little liberty there was in Napoleonic era France, but the belief in rule by reason tends to fit alongside quite nicely with authoritarianism. Like Xeno, Napoleon would simply argue that society would be run a lot better if people with expertise, like himself, were put in charge. That being said, such a philosophy is just about as cruel as it is flawed. If technocracy tends to come hand in hand with the belief in dictatorship, then this essentially just means replacing one oppressive society with another, while technocrats are also not always neutral actors who don't pursue interests of their own. Even scientists can have their own agenda, so the problem lies not with who is at the top of society, but the form of society itself. Senku understands this, stating, "Instead of taking the world as it is for ourselves, we'd rather craft the world of the future. That's what gets me excited." In contrast to Zeno's deeply elitist philosophy that condemns large portions of the population, Senku believes that science and technology can be used to help everyone and lift the whole of society past the problems of the pre-petrification world. This is likely informed by his experiences during the village arc. Despite being ignorant and even initially hostile to modern technology, Senku was able to win over such figures as Ginno and Magma with careful explanation and practical demonstrations. As a result, Senku holds an egalitarian point of view that goes nicely with his general hope and optimism for the future. Finally, while I think that Tsukasa's eventual transformation from enemy to ally was sufficiently justified by the traumatic origins of his ideology, it's a little difficult to say the same about Xeno. His views seem a lot more cohesive than Tsukasa's, and are also informed by his real-life adult experiences. Nevertheless, he ends up collaborating with Senku rather amicably, even passing up several opportunities for betrayal. The question is, why? It's a little ambiguous, but I think what eventually brings Xeno over to the side of the Allies is his mentor-student relationship with Senku. The look that he gives him when they meet for the first time post-petrification says it all really. I mean, does this look like the face of a man who's about to crush the young scientist that he helped develop? No, definitely not. So it's either that, or the Ichiro Nagaki just wanted to get the story over and done with. If anything, I think that this is our first sign that Dr. Stone's exploration of philosophy isn't quite as complete as initially thought. For all its central, cerebral, ideological conflicts, it is ultimately a shonen manga, published in a magazine made for young boys. The good guys always have to win in the end, so of course Xeno and Tsukasa eventually come over to the protagonist's point of view, regardless of whether it makes sense or not. That being said, there is one antagonist who doesn't follow the same pattern, Minister Ibara. Serving as the main villain for the Age of Exploration arc, Ibara is unique in the sense that he never comes over to the good side and never ends up adopting Senku's point of view. Unfortunately, this is mainly because he essentially has no philosophy of his own. He's essentially just an evil man, more preoccupied with maintaining control over Treasure Island and its citizens than what kind of form society should take post-petrification. In my opinion, this is why his arc felt a little lacking compared to the others, even if the final battle was pretty cool. The same goes for the actual ending. And this is a big spoiler, so if you aren't up to date yet, then I would strongly recommend skipping to the time shown on screen. While I've got no problem with the Medusas themselves being the cause of the petrification, we don't learn their motivations until the very end. For me, Dr. Stone really shines when we feel the presence of the main antagonist, even when they aren't on screen or on the page, through their ideas and how they oppose Senku's worldview. You can't really say the same thing about either the Medusas or Minister Ibara, but at least the final arc went a lot faster than the Age of Exploration did. In this sense, so much of Dr. Stone's appeal comes from the power of philosophy. When two distinct ideologies or worldviews are pitted against one another, they create a Weekly Shonen Jump series that is utterly unlike anything else, which is why Dr. Stone will always occupy a special place in my heart. Far from just the surface level of being a science-based shonen series, it's ultimately a story about the potential of humanity, how far we've come, and how far we can still go from here. This video was my way of saying thanks for all the good memories over the years. Seeing Dr. Stone finally come to an end was definitely bittersweet to say the least, but I'll never forget the time we spent together. Inagaki sensei and Boichi sensei, if you're listening, この5年間、毎週科学の力を見せてくれて本当にありがとうございました。お疲れ様でした。